Imagine yourself sitting in a classroom and your teacher says, Rome fell, and then darkness descended. Written on the blackboard, Dark Ages, 500 to 1500 AD, and you're told that the church stopped science, people became ignorant, and Europe became a backward continent. But what if I told you that all of this is a carefully crafted myth, a story we've been deliberately taught, but the real history tells something completely different? Today, we're embarking on a journey that will shatter your understanding of medieval Europe. Because what if I told you that the so-called Dark Ages were actually one of the most innovative, creative, and intellectually vibrant periods in human history? What if the very institution blamed for holding back progress, the Catholic Church, was actually the driving force behind universities, scientific inquiry, and the preservation of all human knowledge? Sounds impossible, right? But here's the twist. The evidence has been hiding in plain sight for centuries. We just weren't looking in the right places. So buckle up, because what you're about to discover will make you question everything you thought you knew about history. Let us start with a question that should make you suspicious. Who coined the term Dark Ages? Was it a medieval historian? A contemporary observer? No. The term was popularized by Renaissance scholars and later Enlightenment thinkers who had a very specific agenda. They wanted to make their own era look brilliant by comparison, so they painted the previous 1,000 years as an intellectual wasteland. It's the oldest marketing trick in the book. Make your competitor look bad, so you look good. Francesco Petrarca, the Italian scholar from the 14th century, called the medieval period dark to highlight his own era's supposed enlightenment. But here's what he conveniently left out. He was educated by the very system he was criticizing. The universities, the books, the Latin he wrote in, all products of that dark medieval world. Then came the Protestant Reformation, and suddenly there was another reason to bash the medieval period. It was dominated by the Catholic Church. Anti-Catholic sentiment became fashionable, and what better way to discredit the Church than to claim it had suppressed knowledge for 1,000 years? By the 18th century Enlightenment, this narrative was set in stone. Voltaire and other philosophers portrayed the mid-medieval Church as the enemy of reason. But here's the shocking part. None of them actually studied medieval manuscripts or visited medieval libraries. They were attacking a caricature, not reality. So ask yourself, what else have we been wrong about? What if everything we think we know about this period is based on propaganda, not evidence? Now, let's talk about what was really happening while Rome was supposedly falling into darkness. Picture this. It's 476 AD. The Western Roman Empire has collapsed. Barbarian tribes are sweeping across Europe. Cities are burning and chaos reigns. In this moment of maximum crisis, who steps up to save civilization? Not kings, not armies, but monks. Yes, monks. Those people we've been told were backward and superstitious. Here's what actually happened, and it's more thrilling than any heist movie. As Roman cities crumbled, monks created a network of monasteries across Europe. But these weren't just religious retreats. They were the data centers of their time, the backup drives of human civilization. Every monastery had a scriptorium, a room dedicated to one mission, copying books. Imagine the scene. A cold stone room, candlelight flickering, and monks bent over parchment, carefully copying letter by letter, page by page, book by book. They copied everything. Greek philosophy, Roman engineering texts, medical treatises, mathematical works, scientific observations. They didn't discriminate based on whether the content was Christian or pagan. They understood something profound. Knowledge itself is sacred. Here's the twist that nobody tells you. Without these monks, we wouldn't have Aristotle. We wouldn't have Plato. We wouldn't have Euclid's geometry or Galen's medical texts. The works of ancient Greece and Rome that the Renaissance later rediscovered. The monks had been preserving them all along. It's like finding out that the librarian you ignored was actually protecting the only copies of humanity's greatest books. But here's where it gets even more interesting. The monks didn't just copy, they improved. They invented new forms of punctuation to make texts easier to read. They created better ink formulations that would last longer. They developed new binding techniques to protect books. They standardized letter forms, creating what we now call lowercase letters. The Carolingian minuscule, which is the ancestor of the font you're reading right now. And the scale of this operation? Absolutely massive. A single monk might spend 25 years copying out the complete Bible. Monasteries employed dozens of copyists working simultaneously. Some books required the skins of 300 sheep just for the parchment. This was industrial-scale knowledge preservation, happening across hundreds of monasteries, spanning the entire European continent. Now imagine you're a young monk in Ireland, at the monastery of Clonmacnoise in the 7th century. Your abbot hands you a Greek manuscript and says, "Copy this." But you don't know Greek, so what do? You learn Greek. These monks became multilingual scholars out of necessity. They created dictionaries, grammars, and translation guides. Irish monks became so skilled that they traveled to continental Europe, establishing new monasteries and schools, spreading literacy wherever they went. But wait, here comes another twist. While these monks were saving books, they were also revolutionizing something far more fundamental: agriculture. And this is where the story gets really interesting because it connects to something we can still see today. Monasteries weren't just libraries. They were experimental farms, research stations, and agricultural schools. The Cistercian monks, in particular, became the agricultural innovators of medieval Europe. Let me paint you a picture. It's the 12th century, and a group of Cistercian monks arrives at a piece of wasteland. Swampy, infertile, useless. Within 20 years, that same land is producing more food than the richest farms in the region. How? They developed systematic drainage systems, crop rotation schedules, selective breeding programs, and water management techniques that were centuries ahead of their time. The three-field system of crop rotation that sustained European agriculture for centuries spread primarily through monastic networks. The heavy plow that could turn the thick clay soils of northern Europe, developed and improved in monastic workshops, the horse collar that made horses viable as draft animals. Another monastic innovation. And here's something that will blow your mind. The monks kept detailed written records of everything: planting dates, weather patterns, yields, soil conditions, breeding outcomes. They were conducting long-term agricultural experiments and documenting the results. This is the scientific method. Centuries before Francis Bacon supposedly invented it, but it goes deeper. Monasteries bred better varieties of crops, developed new strains of fruit trees, and created some of the finest vineyards in Europe. Belgian Trappist monks are still famous for their beer, but that's not just tradition, that's the continuation of centuries of refinement and experimentation in fermentation science. The Benedictine liqueur de Dom Benedictine, created by monks experimenting with herbal medicine. Champagne, developed by a monk named Dom Pérignon, who was trying to prevent wine from fermenting in the bottle. He failed at that, but accidentally created something even better. These monasteries became centers of knowledge transfer. Local farmers would come to learn new techniques. Monks would travel to other monasteries, sharing innovations. It was an open-source knowledge network, centuries before the internet. And the impact was staggering. Between 1000 and 1300 AD, European agricultural productivity doubled. This allowed population growth, urbanization, and the creation of the surplus wealth that funded cathedrals, universities, and art. The entire flowering of medieval civilization rested on agricultural innovations that came primarily from monasteries. Now, here's the question that should be nagging at you. Why don't we learn about this in school? Why is the narrative always Tardus, Dark Ages, backwardness, when the evidence clearly shows innovation and progress? And now we arrive at the most shocking revelation of all. Ready for this? The Catholic Church, the institution accused of suppressing science, actually invented the university system. Not sponsored it, not tolerated it, invented it. The University of Bologna, founded in 1088 by the Church. The University of Paris, 1150, established by the Church. Oxford, Cambridge, Salamanca, Padua, all founded and funded by the Church. By 1500, there were over 60 universities in Europe, and virtually all of them were church institutions. But here's where it gets wild. These universities had academic freedom that would shock you. Professors and students could debate anything, including church doctrine. The University of Paris became famous for its contentious theological debates, where scholars would argue every side of every question. This wasn't suppression, this was institutionalized intellectual combat. Let me give you a specific example that shatters the narrative. In the 13th century, at the University of Paris, scholars were reading and debating the works of Aristotle, which had just been translated from Arabic sources. Some of Aristotle's ideas contradicted Christian teaching. So what did the church do? Ban the books? Burn the heretics? No. They assigned their best thinker, Thomas Aquinas, to reconcile Aristotle with Christian theology. The result was the Summa Theologica, one of the most sophisticated philosophical works ever written, which synthesized Greek philosophy with Christian thought. But here's the twist within the twist. Even when church authorities occasionally did try to ban certain interpretations of Aristotle, the universities largely ignored them. The books kept being read, the debates continued, and the authorities eventually backed down. Why? Because the church itself had created a culture of intellectual inquiry that it couldn't fully control, even when it wanted to. Think about what this means. The institution supposedly opposed to free thought had created spaces where free thought was the entire purpose. It's like if a dictator built a democracy and then couldn't figure out how to shut it down. And the curriculum? These medieval universities taught what was called the 7 liberal arts: grammar, rhetoric, logic, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. After mastering these, students could specialize in law, medicine, or theology. They studied Arabic mathematical texts, Greek philosophy, Roman law, and yes, the Bible. It was the most comprehensive educational system the world had yet seen. But here's something even more fascinating. These universities were international institutions. A student could start at Oxford, transfer credits to Paris, and finish at Bologna. They had a common language, Latin, and recognized each other's degrees. This was the first truly international educational network in human history, and it was organized by the church. The famous medieval scholar Roger Bacon, yes, a Franciscan friar, wrote about experimental science, optics, and even predicted flying machines and submarines in the 13th century. Nicole Oresme, a Catholic bishop, developed a graphical representation of velocity and acceleration in the 14th century, laying groundwork for what would later become calculus. Jean Buridan, a French priest, developed the theory of impetus, which challenged Aristotelian physics and paved the way for Newton's laws of motion. These weren't rebels working against the church. They were church scholars working within church institutions. The call was coming from inside the house the entire time. So let's pull back and see the full picture. What really happened during the so-called Dark Ages? After Rome fell, instead of descending into chaos, European civilization reorganized around a new institution, the church. Monks preserved the knowledge of antiquity while simultaneously innovating in agriculture, engineering, and organization. They created a network of monasteries that functioned as libraries, schools, hospitals, and research centers. They developed new technologies, improved farming techniques, and maintained literacy during a period of political fragmentation. Then, as stability returned, the church channeled resources into creating universities, establishing a formal system of higher education that became the foundation for all modern academia. These universities fostered debate, preserved ancient texts, and trained the scholars who would later spark the Renaissance and the scientific revolution. The rediscovery of ancient learning during the Renaissance? It was not a rediscovery at all. Those texts had been sitting in monastic and university libraries the entire time, being studied, copied, and debated. Renaissance scholars didn't rescue knowledge from the Dark Ages. They inherited an intact intellectual tradition that the medieval church had carefully maintained and expanded. So why the myth? Why has this period been so systematically misrepresented? Part of it is Protestant anti-Catholic propaganda. Part of it is Renaissance self-promotion. Part of it is Enlightenment philosophy needing a villain to position itself against. And part of it is just the human tendency to create simple narratives. Ancient world good, Dark Ages bad, Renaissance good, modern world best. But history is never that simple. The truth is that the medieval period was a time of remarkable innovation and intellectual vitality. It gave us universities, hospitals, the scientific method, mechanical clocks, eyeglasses, gunpowder, the printing press, and countless agricultural and engineering advances. It created a unified intellectual culture across Europe that spoke a common language and debated common questions. It preserved the learning of antiquity while adding its own contributions. The next time someone tells you the Dark Ages were dark, ask them, dark for whom? The monks copying manuscripts by candlelight? The scholars debating philosophy at the University of Paris? The Cistercians revolutionizing agriculture? The architects building cathedrals that still stand today? The reality is that the Dark Ages were only dark to those who refused to look at the evidence. The light was always there, burning in monastery scriptoriums, university halls, and cathedral schools. We just needed to open our eyes to see it. And here's the final twist. By believing the myth of the Dark Ages, we've actually created our own darkness, a blind spot in our understanding of history that has prevented us from learning valuable lessons about how civilizations preserve and transmit knowledge across generations of turmoil. The medieval monks understood something we've forgotten, that civilization is fragile, that knowledge can be lost, and that preserving it requires dedication, resources, and institutions designed specifically for that purpose. In an age where misinformation spreads faster than truth, where attention spans shrink by the year, and where we trust algorithms over libraries, maybe we need to learn from those backward medieval monks who understood that some things are worth protecting no matter the cost. The Dark Ages weren't dark. We've just been looking at them with our eyes closed. And now that you know the truth, you can't unsee it. Everything you thought you knew about medieval Europe was wrong. And that it's not just a historical footnote, it is a reminder that the narratives we accept without question are often the ones most worth questioning. So the next time someone tells you that the church held back progress, that medieval people were ignorant, or that the Dark Ages were dark, smile because you know something they don't. You know that history is written by those who want to make themselves look good, and that the truth is always more complex, more interesting, and more surprising than the simple stories we tell ourselves. The light was always there. We just had to learn how to see it.